When I began my channel nearly 2 years ago, I posted a video on the Calvine incident, one of Scotland's most notorious UFO sightings. It was said that in 1990, on the 4th of August, two hikers took 6 photographs of an odd flying metallic object while out walking one day near the village of Calvine. These photos were sent to the Scottish Daily Record newspaper, who in turn handed them to the Ministry of Defence. The hiker's story was never published, and the pictures taken that day vanished. 19 years later, on the 21st of March 2009, some documents concerning the event were declassified, verifying the story and that the photos existed. And not only that, they had undergone analysis at the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre. When I first covered this story, back in 2020, some more information had just been declassified, exhibiting more proof that the Ministry of Defence had these pictures and that they were part of an investigation. But that's where the story came to a halt. The British military delayed the release of any more information pertaining to the Calvine incident for a further 50 years. The documents covering the investigation would not be declassified until 2076. I asked then why the Ministry of Defence was so hesitant to release the documents, and wondered if we would ever get an answer to one of Scotland's most intriguing mysteries. Then I came across an article released on the 12th of August 2022 by UAP Media UK, claiming to have found one of the lost Calvine photographs. Our update actually begins in February 2021, when a Freedom of Information request concerning the incident was published. The request mentioned a recent report in the Scottish Sun newspaper that Ministry of Defence files relating to the Calvine incident, which should have been released due to the 30-year rule, were delayed until 2076. The request then goes on to list specific questions, which were answered by the National Archive. The first question was, did the Ministry of Defence transfer this dossier to the National Archive? The answer was that the delayed files were sent and now reside in the National Archive. Question 2, was it just the dossier, or were supplementary materials included? For example, the 6-colour photographs. The archive answered that there were no photographs in the dossier, and it specifically states that the original negatives were returned to the Scottish Daily Record. The third question, are these files marked as classified or somehow exempt from the Freedom of Information Act? If so, what is the specific reason? The National Archive told the questioner that the redactions found in the open version of the document covered personal information such as names and addresses of those who had contacted the Ministry of Defence reporting the UFO sighting. Question 4. Is it normal for files to be delayed 50 plus years? Have you, the person replying to this request, ever seen this happen? It would seem that this level of delay is actually fairly usual for personal information, as it has to remain redacted for the supposed lifetime of the subject. This is assumed to be 100 years after their date of birth. And the final question, is the Scottish Sun's claim that you are actively withholding these files accurate? If so, who gave you this right? Again, the National Archive repeated its initial statement, suggesting that the only information that was secured relates to personal data. So from this published FOI request, we can see that the Ministry of Defence did not hand over any of the photographs, suggesting that they are either still being held by the Ministry of Defence or truly were returned to the newspaper. This also clears up the redacted information, which is specifically being delayed. And although I really want to know who made the report, and if they could be interviewed about this whole case, I can completely understand the right to privacy. We now turn our attention away from the hikers and towards Associate Professor David Clark of Sheffield Hallam University. Dr. Clark has been actively investigating the Calvine incident for some years, and after many dead ends, he finally experienced a rather remarkable breakthrough in the case. In late 2021, Dr. Clark was put in contact with retired Royal Air Force press officer Craig Lindsay. Craig had worked on the Calvine case back in 1990 and acted as a go-between for the Daily Record and the Ministry of Defence. During this time, Craig acquired an original print of one of the Calvine hiker photographs, showing the unidentified object. Along with this print, Mr. Lindsay also possessed the original envelope which contained the photos that were sent from the Daily Record to the Ministry of Defence. In May of 2022, Dr. Clark travelled to Scotland in order to interview Mr. Lindsay and see the infamous photograph. After Dr. Clark verified that the envelope and the picture were the items he had been hunting for some time, Mr. Lindsay agreed to gift the items to the Sheffield Hallam University archives. Once the media was in the archive, it was then analysed by senior lecturer in photography Andrew Robertson, who stated that to the best of his knowledge, the photo showed no apparent signs of manipulation. He then went on to say that this photo is either of a genuine, unidentified flying object in the sky, or a physical construction or manipulation that was used to create the effect in front of the camera lens, as the object could not have been created by the processing or the printing of the image. So now we have one of the famous photographs from the Calvine incident. But what does it truly show? Many commenters have suggested that the image shown is actually in the wrong orientation, and that turning it 180 degrees would show that it is a reflection from the surface of a pond, lake, or loch. When the picture is inverted, the diamond-shaped object may just be a rock or piece of floating debris, which is mirrored on the calm water. Mr. Robertson's photographic analysis actually describes some of the possible issues with this hypothesis. He suggests that the top half of the diamond is not an exact mirror copy, which would be problematic for the reflection hypothesis. Not only that, but he also states that it is very unlikely that a single viewpoint could produce the reflections of the shape, the trees, and the fence as they appear in the image. Continuing, Robert states that if the water source was low in a valley, he would expect to see the valley side reflected beyond the fence at the top side. He also comments on the mirror-like stillness of the water and the lack of floating debris, which he finds to be quite unlikely. In his conclusion on the reflection hypothesis, Robertson claims that the issues mentioned previously make this interpretation highly unlikely, but does add that the possibility of the image being a reflection cannot be completely ruled out. So if it is not a reflection, then what is the object, and why has the government refused to disclose all the information surrounding the incident? Dr. Clark has his own ideas about that. It is his belief that the object in the image is far from another worldly craft, and was most likely created by British or American military intelligence, and may be a form of experimental reconnaissance aircraft. Clark states that he is 100% sure that someone somewhere in the military establishment, in either Britain or the US, knows exactly what the photograph shows. Although he leaves open the possibility that the whole scenario has just been a very elaborate prank that has spun wildly out of control. At this point, we are now left with possibly more questions than before the image was released. But whatever it shows, the picture and the Calvine incident itself remains very much a mystery. The image claimed to be the best UFO photograph ever seen has now been released to the public, so I will leave you to judge for yourself what was seen on the Calvine Hills 32 years ago. Thank you for listening, and a special thank you to all my patrons for their continued support. I know this is not my usual kind of video, but when I started this channel, I covered a few UFO and alien encounters within Scotland, which I really enjoyed researching, and this one in particular was great. I am not entirely sure what to believe in this case, but I love the story and the mystery behind it. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back soon with some more Scottish folklore. Slán Java.